name's 4:15. So my name's Rob Pitcairn. I'm a neurologist at the National Hospital for Neurology, which is one of the sites involved in delivering the highly specialised service for rare mitochondrial diseases. And my remit is to talk about current UK clinical trials. So I'm going to start by talking just a little bit about the phases of clinical trials, and I won't need to dwell too long on this because Bobby's already introduced this concept very nicely. I'm then going to talk about the currently active and almost to be active UK clinical trials. So the focus of this talk really is on what's going on in the UK rather than worldwide necessarily, although I will touch on that slightly, and then there'll be a summary at the end. So this is the pathway that a drug takes from its discovery to being able to prescribe it in clinic after it's been licensed. And as Bobby mentioned, this pathway, it's a long pathway, and from this point here to this point here, it can be decades and billions of pounds. But what basically each component of this pathway involves is as follows. So you find an interesting molecule in the lab that seems to look like it's doing something in the Petri dish, basically. You often look at that in cells derived from people with the condition, so with mitochondrial disease, and it seems to be doing something positive, although that's in the context of a single cell as opposed to a whole body, and those two things are very different. And so the next best step to a human body is an animal, and so the next step is looking at that molecule that you've looked at in a single cell in a Petri dish in an animal, and that is normally a mouse or a rat, and then later on often different species and larger species to try and get closer to a human to understand and be reassured that the effect being seen in the animal is going to be similar to that in human. And so what happens is you look at the drug in the animal, you see if you can replicate what you found in the single cell, so it's actually doing something good, and you make sure it's safe. And what that often involves is actually increasing the dose of the drug in the animal to a point that you'd never ever use in real life, but to know the very top dose that will cause toxic effects. And it doesn't matter what the drug is, if you increase it to high enough levels, it can be a vitamin, it will cause toxicity eventually. And then when you work out what the toxicity is, you can see, well, what at these very, very high levels, what goes wrong in that animal. So does the liver there's a problem with the liver, a problem with the heart. And then you kind of then understand what the very top level is that you could potentially prescribe in people, and from that you extrapolate what the definitely safe dose would be in people. And you make sure you're going to give a level of a drug that's within that range so you don't cause toxicity. And that's when you start moving, after also testing it probably more than one species, you start moving into clinical trials involving humans. And that starts really with very small numbers of people, because what you're most interested in is the safety of the drug. And you start with healthy volunteers, and you often see these advertised. You hear them on the radio. We've got this new drug. We'd like healthy volunteers to volunteer, and they're paid for that. And what the focus is at this point is safety, and also how the drug is being metabolized within a human as opposed to an animal. You then, and that's called a phase 1 trial. You then start moving into people with the condition that you're wanting to treat. So as opposed to healthy volunteers, you're moving into people with the condition, so let's say mitochondrial disease, and you do a very similar sort of study. Again, looking at safety and looking at the way the drug is metabolized, because it's possible that when you look at the drug in someone with a mitochondrial disease, it might behave in a slightly different way than someone without mitochondrial disease. So you're still being very cautious at this stage. And often this stage also involves increasing from quite a low dose to a slightly higher dose of the drug as well, just to kind of get as much information about the way the drug is behaving in the body as possible. And so it's not until this phase, the phase 2 trial, that the emphasis starts moving more towards, well, is the drug actually doing something positive in terms of mitochondrial disease, for instance? Because you've got some confidence now that the drug is safe, so you're reassured by that. You know what dose is probably going to be the best dose and it's going to be well tolerated. And so you then move into this phase 2 trial to actually see, well, is it actually doing anything positive? And as we're going along here, we're looking at more and more patients. And if this was a diabetes or blood pressure trial, you'd be looking at hundreds to potentially thousands of patients. Whereas in rare diseases, you haven't got that luxury. You're looking at far fewer patients. And you try and look for a signature of a positive effect. And that signature at this stage may not necessarily be a clinical signature. It may be a signature that you measure in the blood, or using an MRI scan, or something that's really sensitive to picking up the positive effect, but not necessarily a clinically positive effect. So it might not be that the person feels better, but that you've got some sort of measure that something's working. It's doing what we showed, or was showed at the very beginning, doing something positive. And then finally, or almost finally, you move on to phase 3 trials. So this is when you're looking at many, many people, and really, that's the point when you want to measure something clinically meaningful. So you want to look at many, many people, because the more people you look at, more people you can look at, the more likely you are to pick up a small change if there is one. So a statistically significant change. And so that's when drug companies are really interested in the clinically meaningful effect, because that's what the regulatory bodies want to hear. The people who approve and license drugs, they want to know that, that they're interested if there's a physiological effect of the drug, that it does something at the cellular level. But actually what they want to hear for you to license the drug is that actually it's going to cause some clinically meaningful benefit to patients. And so the primary thing you're looking at this stage is efficacy, but you're still interested in the safety of the drug. And then there is a phase sometimes after this, which is where people are on the drug for quite a long time, years potentially, where you're really accumulating the safety data over that time period. So as you're going along, you're looking at these different phases. The studies are often lasting longer and longer. So you might go from the phase 1, which is maybe a week or two, phase 2 for a few weeks and months, and sometimes in phase 3 you're doing a trial for years. And that's why you can see that this process can take a long time. And you're also looking at an increasing number of patients. So that's generally the pathway from discovery of something in a lab to actually showing a meaningful effect in the people. Then the bit that's missing here is actually then getting it approved by and licensed, which can again add a significant amount of time. So at the moment in mitochondrial disease, there's a lot going on. It's a really exciting time in terms of developing treatments, different treatment strategies, and also clinical trials. If I'd given this talk, I had 30 minutes. Alison told me actually I've got 20 now. But 4 or 5 years ago, there would be nothing really to show you. So it's a fantastically exciting time in the field. There's a lot going on here. So a lot of the really sort of exciting genetic type treatments that are happening are happening here. So they're still some way off. The majority of the human trials that we're involved with are here, the phase 1 and the phase 2. So looking at the safety for the first time. For the first time, these treatments are being used in people with mitochondrial disease, and trying to look for just the early signature of them actually doing something positive. And there's one trial where we're at the phase 3 stage, so it's really a pre-licensing trial. And these later phase trials are often done in multiple sites across the world, particularly in rare diseases where you want to look at as many people as possible, and to do that you really need to be collaborating worldwide. And just one other thing to say is I'm going to talk about quite a number of trials here. Some of them you'll see are very specific to certain diseases, so they might only be relevant for one very, very specific disease, one gene, whereas others are treatments that potentially could be used for anyone with mitochondrial disease. So this is not exhaustive, this list. This is taken from a website that people are supposed to register their trials on. And so this is when you search for interventional studies, that just means a study that you're using something to try and help in a disease. And mitochondrial diseases, this is a list that comes up. So this wouldn't actually include anyone who hadn't used mitochondrial disease as the denominator. But there are 9 studies. And of those 9 studies, 5 are actually taking place in the UK. So there's a lot of activity in the UK in terms of clinical trials. And this isn't actually exhaustive, because I know there are 1 or 2 that aren't on the list that are coming soon. So, this will end up being a bit of a list. I'm going to go through each trial just to give you a flavour of what's going on. I'm very happy if someone wants to shout out, that's absolutely fine, and ask a question. But I'm going to give you a flavour. So there's quite a lot of content to some of these slides, but I'm just going to pick out some specific things, just so you're aware and just have a flavour of what's happening at the moment. So this is the phase 3 study. This is the only phase 3 trial that's happening in mitochondrial disease at the moment. This is pre-licensing. So basically, if the company shows that this particular product works, they're going to move towards trying to get it licensed so that you can prescribe it in mitochondrial diseases. So this is the phase 3 trial. It's called SPIM 301. There was a SPIM 200 and various other iterations as well, but we're up to SPIM 301. And this is the gold standard that we like to see for clinical trials. It's randomized, which means it's completely random whether you receive the active drug or the placebo, so the kind of sham. It's double-blind, which means neither the person receiving the drug or the sham nor the clinician knows whether that is the active product or not. And that's to reduce the risk of bias being introduced, because we all want the drug to work. So the clinician wants the drug to work, and the patient wants the drug to work. So you can't help introducing subconscious bias. When someone's come back and you're doing the measurements to see if the drug's working, you're kind of wanting to, where you walk a bit faster, or you think, oh no, they are a bit stronger, and you can't help that. That's subconscious. So introducing this double blind means that you don't do that. Placebo controlled, so there's a placebo arm. And it's looking at this drug called elamipretide. And this is given as an injection into the skin, a bit like an insulin injection. So it's currently closed to recruitment. So the target recruitment, and this is a worldwide study, so there are over 30 sites involved in this study, 2 in the UK, a number across Europe, and a large number also in the States. So it's fully recruited. The target was 202, and they've recruited well over that. I think it's more like 240 they end up recruiting at the end. And they're looking at this drug called elamipretide, and this is it's like a small protein that gets into the mitochondria, and it binds to a fat called cardiolipin. And cardiolipin sits between the enzymes that produce energy in the mitochondria, the respiratory chain complexes, and helps stick them together a bit like glue. And what that does is it maintains the efficiency of these enzymes in producing energy. Because what happens is when they become less efficient, when you've got a mitochondrial disease, they produce more of that reactive oxygen species that Bobby mentioned, that we try and use antioxidants for. And what that does is it drives the respiratory chain enzymes away from each other, making them less efficient. And it's a vicious cycle. So they become less efficient, they produce even more of these reactive oxygen species, and they get further apart. So what the company think this is doing, and this is what they think, is that the drug that they produce sticks to the cardiolipin, helps it bond these enzymes together, and improves respiratory chain efficiency. And so in theory, this drug should work for anyone with mitochondrial disease. It's not for a specific type of mitochondrial disease. It improves the efficiency of these enzymes in anyone, irrespective of their underlying gene problem, their age, And that's a theory. And so the study that we've been involved with, and Newcastle as well in the UK, along with all these other sites, is looking at this. And given it's a phase 3 trial, the emphasis is really on does the drug work rather than safety, because we've established safety in the earlier studies. And this is a commercial study, so the company is called Stealth Biotherapeutics. And so this is just a flavour of, these are the sorts of things that we're looking at or the company wanted to look at in this particular trial. So they were interested in how fast someone could walk in 6 minutes before and after the treatment. Various questionnaires to do with fatigue and quality of life. Wow, that went quick. And obviously, the safety and tolerability is still an important factor, but it's a secondary outcome measure. So I won't. Some of this is sort of it's sort of just quite more detail about this particular study. So I don't think we need to dwell too much on this. So we're now into a part 2 of this study, which is open label, and all that means is all the people who we don't know who is on the placebo, but everyone now is on the drug. So it's called an open label study because everyone's on the drug. So having had 6 months of either the drug or the placebo, everyone got the option to go onto the drug for up to 2.5 years, and that's where we are at the moment with that trial. But the company are currently analysing the data from that first 6 months to see if it was positive, and if it is, they'll be going to the FDA, which is the regulatory body in the states that approves drugs, to try and get it licensed to be able to prescribe it. The second study that we're involved with, and this is between London and Newcastle, is called RENIO 001. So this is peroxisome proliferator activator receptor agonist, or PPAR for short. And there are a number of these receptors, and this is focusing on this one called delta. And in effect, what this does is it improves the utilization of fats to produce energy. So it's almost bypassing the respiratory chain, which is the problem with the mitochondrial disease, and also potentially it increases the number of mitochondria. Now, it probably increases both, in the people with problems with their mitochondrial DNA, it probably increases both the wild type, so the healthy and the mutant mitochondria. But the idea is that you still move above the threshold that is causing problems, and if you can increase the number of healthy mitochondria above that threshold, hopefully it will improve symptoms. So that's the plan. So this is actually open to recruitment. So we're involved in this at the moment. This is a phase 1b trial. So again, quite early on in that pathway, focusing on the safety and the way that the drug is acting in the body of people with mitochondrial disease. It's a 12-week study. It's a tablet that you take once a day. And then there's an extension phase to the study that will go on for 36 weeks. And the plan is to recruit 24 people with mitochondrial disease. And there's going to be a muscle biopsy